and literally just bashed in the window and let us into that store. If it wasn't for that, I'm not sure what we would have done, and that's been a huge problem all day. Couldn't just see anything, and that was the problem.
What was the heat like, and how suffocating was it for those trying to escape?
It was hot, but luckily we were a couple of blocks away, and the bigger problem was all the dust, and it got into your lungs, and you just kept coughing, and you couldn't speak, and you couldn't see. That, I mean, people were walking at the polls, people were crying and screaming. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
Well, again, these are just a couple of people who've been on the scene all day, Peter. And as we said, we have watched this footage. We have seen people both heroic, terrified, and mystified. And the scene out here tonight is really just one of complete, almost wounded numbness. And there's no other phrase I can summon at this moment to convey it to you.
Thank you very much, Diane. Diane Sawyer, who's been in Midtown Manhattan all day trying to get a grasp of the city and very effectively what's going on around her. Don Dahler from ABC News Good Morning America has been down with a couple of freelance photographers. It's freelance photographers who brought us the most intimate, the closest up video of what actually happened at the Twin Trade Towers today. It's a reminder of the world we live in. There's a camera pointed by somebody almost everywhere. Catch you up very quickly on a story to say again what we said before World News Tonight came on, which that U.S. officials speaking for some reasons on the conditions of anonymity say the United States is not involved in any of the violence going on in Kabul, the Afghanistan capital tonight. This appears to be an intra-Afghan affair that the supporters of a leading anti-Taliban leader who was killed the other day have been rocketing the city tonight, so it has nothing, as best we can tell, to do with this. And then, of course, there was the Pentagon, and it just, think back 10 hours, it just began to pile up on us, one thing after the other. One was horrible, the next was third horrible. By the time the Pentagon attacked, shortly after the attack on the Twin Trade Towers, it was amazing. And here's ABC's John McCarthy, who's been there all day. John?
Peter, it was at 9:38 this morning. I was innocently sitting in my office at the Pentagon when there was a jolting blast on the other side of the building. You can see it over my shoulder. A large aircraft came down 395, which is a major highway. It clipped off the tops of many of the light poles on the way in, and it slammed into the building. You can see on the one side of the huge gash that 25 windows down along the Pentagon were destroyed. The building, the section of the building that was hit by the fuselage of the aircraft collapsed several minutes after the aircraft hit it. I was able to get an exclusive walk up to the damaged site with some officials who got me through police lines. The area is surrounded with police evidence markings all over. There was a huge area for medical triage that is quiet now. And now they are continuing to fight fires inside the building, Peter, so they can go ahead and try and get anyone who may be still trapped in the rubble. It took them 5 hours before they were able to get into the building initially and begin to look for people who might be trapped and injured.
John, we heard a while ago, and there's some chaos here too, as you can understand, about a preliminary casualty figure at the Pentagon. Do you feel you have a good handle on that?
I do not have a good handle on it, Peter. There have been wild rumors from several hundred to over 1,000. It's impossible to know at this point, and I will not speculate.
And you may have said this most recently, and we would never want you to speculate, John. We believe, I believe you said now what you said earlier before, that the senior military officials of the Pentagon, none of them have been hurt to the best of your knowledge.
Don Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, is in just a few minutes going to hold a briefing inside the Pentagon for a very few number of reporters that are over there. And all of the military chiefs have been accounted for, and they have been spending the day in the National Military Command Center. Presumably, they have initially been looking at
in Maryland, the President's Air Force One being escorted in by 3 fighter jets, 2 F-15s, 1 F-16. Close by, very often there are some Air Force jets who go up to bring down, to help escort Air Force One down. But this time these planes were told the fighter jets were much closer to Air Force One. The President will be returning to the White House to address the nation later this evening around 9 p.m. Eastern. But in advance of that, several briefings were standing by. We're waiting for congressional briefing that will occur, the congressional leadership, around 7:30 p.m. Eastern. There will be a briefing from the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, over at the White House. We're also standing by awaiting a briefing from the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. Meanwhile, let's take a look back at some of the sights and sounds of this remarkable day of terror.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help. 'Cause I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm just getting a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you.
The Pentagon briefing is now underway. Here's the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld. Unfortunately, we're having some audio problems from the Defense Secretary. We're going to try to fix that. In the meantime, Orrin Hatch is standing by. Senator Hatch, you're a member of the Intelligence Committee. You're not surprised that the bombings that we heard about, the explosions in Kabul, were not the result of U.S. military action?
No, I'm not surprised because just yesterday, and it looks like it's tied together, Osama bin Laden forces attacked Shah Massoud, who is their enemy in the north and who is also one of the 12 tribal leaders.
Senator, I think we've fixed the audio with Secretary Rumsfeld at the Pentagon. He's briefing reporters. Let's listen.
Offering their sympathy and indeed their assistance in various ways. I'm very pleased to be joined here by Chairman Carl Levin and Senator John Warner. Senator Warner called earlier today and offered his support and was kind enough to come down and has been with us. We've very recently had a discussion with the President of the United States. Chairman Hugh Shelton has just landed from Europe. Secretary of the Army, Tom White, who has a responsibility for incidents like this, as executive agent for the Department of Defense, is also joining me. It's an indication that the United States government is functioning in the face of this terrible act against our country. I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon. The Pentagon's functioning. It'll be in business tomorrow. I know the interest in casualty figures, and all I can say is it's not possible to have solid casualty figures at this time. And the various components are doing roster checks, and we'll have information at some point in the future, and as quickly as it's possible to have it, it will certainly be made available to each of you. I'll be happy to take a few questions after asking First General Shelton if he would like to say anything, and then we will allow the others to make a remark or two.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people, acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks, and matched only by our unity down, root out, relentlessly pursue, support them, cover them. We are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institution is strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator Warner.
Yes, Chairman, Carl Levin, I can agree that Congress stands by the President. The President speaks with one voice to the entire nation. This is indeed the magic for American history. And I think it's fine power. Our President, with him, most notably our armed forces of this world, stand ready not to defend this and our allies against, but such actions directed the future for this world history. We call upon our world and help, because is common in this together. The United States, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack. Again, I commend the Secretary, the Chairman, and how proud we are. We spoke with our President here moments ago. He's got a firm grip on this situation, and the Secretary and the General have a firm grip on our armed forces and in communication of the world over.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then we'll adjourn. Charlie.
Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all in any way that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
I see. And how would you respond if you find out who did this?
Obviously, the President of the United States has spoken on that subject, and those are issues that he will address in good time.
Mr.
Yes.
Secretary, we are getting reports from CNN and others that there are bombs exploding in Kabul, Afghanistan. Are we at the moment striking back, and if so, is the target Osama bin Laden and his organization?
I've seen those reports. They, in no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
Mr. Secretary, you said you could not be specific about casualties. Can you give us some characterization of whether it's dozens or hundreds in the building?
Well, we know there were large number, many dozens in the aircraft that flew at full power, steering directly into between, I think, the first and second floor of the opposite the helipad. You've seen it. There cannot be any survivors. It just would be beyond comprehension. There are a number of people that they've not identified by name, but identified as being dead, and there are a number of casualties. But the FBI has secured the site, and the information takes time to come. People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us what you saw? Mr. Secretary, do you consider what happened today
We're looking also at a picture while we listen to the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld of helicopters that we believe are returning to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. Marine One is the helicopter that has the president on board and lands on the south lawn of the White House, which is the routine procedure when the president returns to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. These are helicopters that we're now seeing approaching the south lawn of the White House. That's a picture of downtown Washington that you're seeing right now. President Bush just landing only a few minutes ago at Andrews Air Force Base, returning to the White House, getting ready to address the nation around 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. Once again, Marine Corps helicopters that we believe are one of them carrying the president and his party returning to the south lawn of the White House. There are 6 helicopters there altogether, 6 Marine Corps helicopters.
It's not possible to give guarantees. The people who work in this building do so voluntarily. They're brave people, and they do their jobs well.
Mr. Secretary, can you give a sense of what happened? What did you see when you left your office, ran down to the site, and apparently helped people on stretchers and then returned to the command center?
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured, most of which were alive and moving, but seriously injured. And a lot of volunteers were doing a terrific job helping to bring them out of the buildings and get them into stretchers and into ambulances and into airlifts.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us how many of the dead were soldiers and how many were civilians? Have you been able to determine that?
Absolutely not. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, today we saw military planes both in New York and in Washington. How much more of a military presence will we see now that this incident has occurred for the next week?
Those kinds of decisions are made day to day. It is correct that we had aircraft flying protective missions at various places in the United States today, and they will do that as appropriate.
Mr. Secretary, what do you say to the American people who may have questions on how something so coordinated has been carried out against this nation? What do you say to them who might not have confidence that our intelligence and our security are what they should be?
I say to them that the President of the United States will be making some remarks to them this evening that will address those subjects.
Mr. Secretary, you've declared, the Pentagon has declared ThreatCon Delta forces around the world. Could you tell me why? Have you received any threats, or has anyone claimed credit for this?
We have, in fact, declared force protection condition Delta and a condition of high alert, indeed the highest alert. We did so almost immediately upon the attacks, and it is still in force.
Mr. Secretary, were there threats issued against other U.S. facilities elsewhere in the world today?
I don't know that there's a day that's gone by since I've been in this job that there haven't been threats somewhere in the world to some facility somewhere. It's one of the complexities of the intelligence business that you have to sort through those kinds of things. But we don't get into the specifics. Yes. You raise your hand there? Yes.
So, rumors earlier in the day. Let me interrupt the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld to report that this is, we believe, Marine One, the President's helicopter, now landing on the south lawn of the White House, which is the usual procedure, bringing President Bush back to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. The President began this day in Sarasota, Florida, where he was going to be promoting his agenda on education, then flew to Louisiana, then flew to Nebraska, and finally, when the Secret Service and U.S. law enforcement thought it was safe, now bringing him back to the White House, where later this evening he will be addressing the nation. Air Force One about to touch down on the south lawn of the White House. John King, our senior White House correspondent, is standing by. John, what do you have over there?
Wolf, as you watch Marine One land here on the South Lawn, we have just been allowed back into the White House. We were evacuated as well earlier today. First, let me read you a statement from the President. This during his travels back to Washington. The President telling his National Security Council, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this country." Now, the President will return to the White House. One of our cameramen, Mike Bannigan, also just a short time ago shot pictures of Laura Bush coming back to the White House in her motorcade. We do not know where she was, being kept in a secure location at this time, but the First Lady is also back in the White House. Also, after Secretary Rumsfeld finishes his briefing at the Pentagon, a number of Bush administration cabinet officials will brief here at the White House to bring us up to date on the activities of their agencies. One, we're told, the Health and Human Service Secretary Tommy Thompson, who is involved, of course, in the medical help, blood banking and others. So he will bring us up to date on his agency. Attorney General John Ashcroft also on his way to the White House as well, we are told. All of this leading up, all these briefings from administration cabinet members leading up to a nationally televised address from the President tonight to the American people from the Oval Office. You see there Marine One sitting on the South Lawn of the White House, a virtual ghost town throughout much of the day as it was evacuated. The President now back in Washington and at the White House. Wolf.
John, the trips to Louisiana and Nebraska that the President took today, that was designed, we're told, and we see a Marine officer walking off Marine One as the President, we expect to emerge from Marine One any second now. We assume that was because security personnel thought it was too dangerous for the President to come right back to Washington. Is that right?
The first stop at Barksdale in Louisiana was designed so the President could get to a command and control center that is fortified and structured so that he could be in contact. You see the President there emerging from Marine One, saluting his Marine escort on the South Lawn of the White House. The direction he turned, it appears he is heading straight into the Oval Office. Had he gone straight, that is the path into the White House residence. The President turning left, indicating he will go straight into his office, the Oval Office. The President saying nothing as he walks by there. The first stop was to get him to a command and control facility so that he could have secure conversations with the Vice President, who is here at the White House, and with the National Security Council. At that point, we had been led to believe by some sources the President would come directly back to Washington. Then they took him to the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command for another briefing with the National Security Council amid some concerns that they wanted to run a few more security checks before bringing the President back to Washington. Obviously, one of the heinous acts we saw today on the Pentagon just a few miles away. So an enormous amount of security concerns. Even as we speak here on the grounds of the White House, you see the President here heading up into the path, being greeted by more agents and his senior staff into the Oval Office. Wolf.
And as he goes into the Oval Office in the West Wing of the White House, once again, John, for some of our viewers who may just be tuning in right now, read to us the statement that the President has just released.
This is a statement from the President. This is a statement, we are told by pool reporters, that he gave to his National Security Council, quoting the President, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this country." We expect a statement very much like that to be included in the nationally televised address the President delivers to the American people tonight. He is meeting right now in the Oval Office with senior advisors to be brought up to date on the latest casualty figures, the latest information the federal government has on just what took place. The administration has also taken one of the steps, Wolf, that seems routine in some ways. Again, a reminder of the tragedy of this day, though issuing a statement just a short time ago declaring the state of New York a major disaster area. Wolf.
And John, security, I take it at the White House, is extraordinary right now under normal circumstances. You don't see the security personnel that we're obviously seeing right now. Is that right?
That is correct. More security on the grounds, more security out in public, uniformed Secret Service, snipers on the buildings all around the compound here. Remember, this compound, the President was not here at the time, but the Vice President was evacuated this morning when all of this was taking place, when the threat on the Pentagon was taking place. Now they're just now letting people back in. We are, I believe, the first reporters to broadcast live from here. Others just getting into the compound now. The security all day long. We were just across the street watching the dogs, the bomb-sniffing dogs out on the compound. Agents at one point patrolling across the street in Lafayette Park with automatic rifles. That an extraordinary scene. We occasionally have bomb scares here. There are occasionally other threats, security threats that cause high level of alerts. Nothing in my 4+ years on this beat, nothing at all like this today. Wolf.
Okay, John King, we'll be back to you. Stand by. Meanwhile, let's go back to Bill Hemmer in Atlanta. Bill?
Well, thank you. And to our viewers who are just joining us possibly at this time, what has been a very already long and horrendous day in the U.S., we're going to quickly recap the developments of this day. It began with a series of coordinated terrorist attacks against the U.S. Then at the top of this hour, less than 60 minutes ago, explosions were seen in Kabul. That's the capital city in Afghanistan. However, reporters traveling with the president and the White House also tells us these explosions are not part of a U.S. strike against the country. Afghanistan's Taliban has been harboring fugitive terrorist Osama bin Laden. U.S. intelligence officials have told CNN there are good indications that persons linked to Osama bin Laden may be responsible for today's terrorist attacks in the U.S. However, that is far from confirmed at this point. Both towers of New York's World Trade Center and a section of the Pentagon have been destroyed. At this time, Nick Robertson by video phone joins us from, again, Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan. Nick, what do you have for us at this point?
Well, Bill, we can confirm that the Northern Alliance, that's the alliance of fighters fighting the Taliban, who hold the last 5% of the country in the northeast of Afghanistan that the Taliban have yet to conquer. They have confirmed to us from their spokesman up there in the north of Afghanistan that they were responsible for the explosions here in Kabul this evening. They also say that they plan more such attacks. They don't say where and they don't say when. They say that they will brief us shortly on that, but they are claiming responsibility for the attacks we've seen here in Kabul this evening. It's not normal for them to attack Kabul in this way, but their leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud, a very key commander who holds together the alliance of fighters in the north of Afghanistan, he rose to fame during the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, where he was undefeated.
All right, clearly we have a breakup of our video signal there from Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan. What you're seeing, though, as the video phone, late technology that allows us to see these nighttime pictures here. It's not nearly as clear as a regular television monitor would provide, but we can see the images of a quieter capital city of Kabul, and Nick Robertson's audio clearly has dropped off at this point. We hope to reestablish the signal again. It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning in Afghanistan, but back in New York, it's just about 7 o'clock, and again, we're about 10 hours removed from what has been a day that will live for a long time in the memories of a lot of Americans who have watched the images throughout the day. Back to New York City, the island of Manhattan, and CNN's Paula Zahn. Paula.
Thank you so much, Bill. And as you just said, even though we're 10 hours out, you can see behind me the remnants of the fire still coming from that area where 2 commercial hijacked jets rammed into Tower 1 and Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. Within the past hour, building number 7, which is also attached to that area, collapsed. As you might remember earlier in the day, Tower number 1 and 2 collapsed, the South and North Tower. We are now being told by officials that the Marriott Hotel, which is in the vicinity of this area, is also in the position of being so degraded it might collapse as well. Just to bring you up to date on what we're facing in New York City right now, a lot of folks got trapped here this morning when a lot of public transportation shut down. We are now told that some of the outbound bridges are now opened up for people to leave the city. We can confirm now that the nation's airports have been completely shut down at least until noon tomorrow. Some conflicting information on that. Another report suggests that those flights might be postponed indefinitely. Before I give you any more details on New York City, I'd like to check in with Robert Gates right now, who is the former director of the CIA. Mr. Gates, are you with me?
I am indeed.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
I'm having trouble hearing Mr. Gates. Let me see if we can make a little adjustment with our audio. As we try to straighten that out, we should probably point out that city officials at this point still will not confirm how many injuries there are, how many fatalities. Secretary Rumsfeld also saying the Pentagon is not in a position to share those numbers with us as well. Mr. Gates, are you with me?
Yes, and yes, I am.
Okay, good. I'm glad you can hear me, sir. In the last news conference that we just watched, Secretary Rumsfeld would not confirm if the Pentagon had any indication of an impending attack. He said he could not divulge that intelligence information tonight. Do you think the Pentagon had any sort of forewarning?
I'm in no position to know whether there was any kind of warning provided. What we often have, though, in these, with dealing with terrorist threats in the 1980s and in the 1970s is information of some kind of an impending operation, but without the kind of detail that would allow you to prepare or to defend. We ran into that with
They've been scanning backwards, and we understand picking up phone calls from other civilians on the planes that...
The families of the victims.
And when it comes to
Atlanta is, of course, reminiscent of the Oklahoma City bombing investigation, which the FBI messed up so much, in part, we think, because they were so overloaded with information, trying to get around a past problem immediately at the beginning of this one.
Well, they've certainly learned a lot of lessons there. Their computer system is somewhat new, and they now have an online case tracking system, which should be helpful. But that's going to be a problem, because this is going to be a case of worldwide leads and national leads and a tremendous amount of paper to keep track of and things not to overlook.
And just so to remind people of how tough it's going to be, the new director of the FBI is a man named Robert Mueller. He's been on the job
just a few days.
Just a few days, and he walks into this. Who will run the operation? FBI Washington, FBI New York? A little hard to understand.
This operation will be run by FBI headquarters from the highest level, from the directors, but the office that has right now been tasked as the lead office is the New York office of the FBI, and there are a number of reasons for that. They have the most experience in international terrorism cases. They have the most cases that they feel may be related to this action, and they have the assets and experience all around the world. And of course, there is the added advantage that they're on the ground in New York, where the largest crime scene is right now. They investigated the first World Trade Center bombing. The bombings of the embassies was a New York FBI case. So this is something that they're quite unfortunately all too well experienced at.
Other than the rescue, the search operation and the hopeful rescue operation, thank you, John, which New York is involved in tonight, and at the Pentagon as well, we're in something of a state of suspended animation. Governor Pataki is just one of the politicians who's come out today and said, make an example of those who are responsible. Well, the answer is the Pentagon was stunned. The FBI, by his own admission, was stunned. You heard Secretary Rumsfeld say they wouldn't discuss intelligence. Nobody knew this was going to happen. There isn't a single shred of evidence, as we've said before today, that anybody had an inkling that this was coming. And if they did, we'll learn about that in days ahead. But in the meantime, one more attempt to pull together this day in New York City. Clearly, New Yorkers and others across the country argue the most important symbol of the United States on the east coast of the United States, and those twin trade towers, a symbol of so much that is America. Here's ABC's James Walker.
As the upper floors of the Trade Center towers burned, inside, employees scrambled to escape.
For the 82nd floor, and I don't know where my peers are. I don't know. I hope to God they're okay. That's all I can say. I don't know what. We saw a shadow. It looked like a plane. Next thing we know, it was boom, boom, and the floor started shaking. And then we saw debris fall down, and next thing we know, we had to get out of the building. We stuck on the stairs for a while. We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby, it was this big explosion.
As soon as he got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
On the street, New Yorkers looked up and watched in horror.
And then we saw the people jumping. We saw what we thought was debris, and we realized it was people jumping.
I started seeing people just they started jumping out of the window, like the 96th floor. They just started one at a time from different parts of the building. I just started seeing the people just drop. And I must have counted like 30 or 40 people, you know.
Rescue workers raced to the scene, but then, some 90 minutes after the attack,
Oh my God, there it goes! Get out of here!
soot and rubble were everywhere, and with it, chaos.
Get out of here!
What scared me the most was the panic, and people were running, and you just saw this great big cloud of
dust just coming from the center of the building and mushrooming out towards the river. There was, people had no place to go. People were going to jump in the river, they were going to swim, they were jumping on a boat, they were breaking glass to get into nearby homes and restaurants.
There was, dust and whatnot everywhere, but it was...
The second building has just come down.
You okay, officer?
Firefighters and police officers found themselves momentarily helpless. Trained to save others, they suddenly had to save themselves.
It's a war. We've been attacked. It's like World War II. It's World War II. This is unbelievable.
Tonight, crews are standing by to start searching for the thousands of people feared missing in the debris. James Walker, ABC News, New York.
Well, you hear of fire. Nobody is accustomed to tragedy to a greater extent than firefighters, and you hear of a firefighter there describing it as World War II. I want to go back and reach into our earlier coverage today for a couple of things. But first, I know that most of the people at ABC News bureaus around the country are out covering the story. Any of them who we can get to come in and give us some sense of the mood of the country as a whole at the moment would be very much appreciated, even if they call in on the telephone. A little earlier today, ABC's Lynn Scher put together a package for us in which we asked someone to take the radar monitoring that the Federal Aviation Administration does of the entire country in components all the way across the country of this one particular aircraft that they were able to track from Boston, maneuvering in such a way that it became clear to them at a horrifying moment that this was an aircraft not following its flight plan that was headed to New York City. And if you put that together with the sense that some people got from the aircraft that there was something going on board these aircraft, simply horrified everybody in the law enforcement establishment, not to mention the two airlines, American and United, are involved. And Charlie Gibson and I have just momentarily been talking about this. Have we got this video available? Can we just move this video up and we'll listen first to the man who tracked this one aircraft. Remember, there were two. Tracked this one aircraft as it was headed towards New York City.
The plane took off about 8 o'clock out of Logan in Boston on its way to Los Angeles, climbed to 29,000 feet and cruising at about 450 knots. About that time, 8:28, the flight took an immediate hard left turn due south. The speed initially decreased by over 100 miles an hour and then increased to over 500. And then as it approached the New York area, it slowed to all the way down to about 300 knots. So and then tragically it impacted in the World Trade Center. American 11 was indeed the first flight, we have confirmed that, of the two.
But as ABC's Charlie Gibson points out in this conversation with me just a moment ago, Charlie, there were two rogue aircraft who were out of flight pattern.
Well, Peter, the two airplanes that hit the two twin towers of the World Trade Center were both out of Boston. That was a description of what happened to Flight 11, which was the first one to come into the towers. And just looking at the timing, it's interesting. The plane took off at exactly 8 o'clock from Logan Airport in Boston, and it was at 8:28 that it took that hard left-hand turn and then crashed into the World Trade Center at about 8:45. So that means for 17 minutes, some air traffic controller had to know that they had a rogue aircraft on their hands heading for New York City. The other flight, the one that went into the second World Trade Center, and that was United Flight 175, a 767 that had taken off for Boston for Los Angeles, took off at 8:15. Then just after it passed the Massachusetts-Connecticut border heading west, just south of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the flight took a 30-degree turn to the south, left toward New Jersey, then another 90-degree turn. It was heading toward Atlantic City, and then it took another hard turn northeast, basically doing a U-turn over New Jersey and slammed into the to the building at 9:03. So again, for a considerable period of time, the air traffic controllers had to know that they had not one but two rogue aircrafts heading for New York.
Thanks, Charlie, very much. Now we want to go to Washington. I think it's Washington because the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, is about to make a public appearance in the White House press room. The man, of course, responsible for the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Today, America has experienced one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed on our soil. These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international LEGAT offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy.
On Ashcroft. And this is Tommy Thompson,
Every single
Secretary of
American
Health and Human Services.
lost something today.
And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that it's been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
Well, it is important for the country. This is, let's just come away from the White House for just a moment, for a second now, and just inadvertently, we get from, it's so important at this point to hear from the representatives of government. Here are the leaders of the Senate and the House of Representatives together. The Speaker of the House in the middle, Dennis Hastert, Tom Daschle, the Senate leader, to his left.
At a time like this, no words that we should utter today or this evening can help the hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today. Our prayers and thoughts and words of consolation goes out to all those who have suffered. But one thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder to fight this evil that's been perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet, but we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the president, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Applause on the politicians for one another, almost willing themselves to stand shoulder to shoulder in a nonpartisan way. This is Tom Daschle, the Democratic leader of the Senate.
Despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the President and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost.
We know as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We'd ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
So, brief remarks from the political leadership, both Republican and Democrat, on the Hill today, and many members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, including Senator Lott just leaving the camera, I think hugging Barbara Mikulski, Democratic.
Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Well, I do not know whether that was a spontaneous gesture, but whether it was or was not. To see members of the House and the Senate, men and women, hugging each other in the face of this attack on the country, standing together on the steps of the Capitol on the evening of the 11th day of the month, 9th month of the year, singing God Bless America, surely reflects some heartfelt attempt by the members of the Congress to say to the world that this is a unified nation in the face of tragedy, as it has, for the most part, always been.
From ABC 7 News, this is a special report, continuing coverage, America Under Attack.
Several incredible and heartwarming scenes unfolding across the nation's capital at this hour. We just witnessed one of those on the steps of the United States Capitol. Good evening. I'm Dale Walters.
And I'm Maureen Bunyan. We want to bring you up to date on the local situation here in Washington in the wake of these terrible attacks today on the Pentagon and also in New York. Let's give you a list of what is open and what is closed and what's going to be open tomorrow in this city of ours. Federal offices are all on unscheduled leave in effect, but they are open. You can take unscheduled leave if you wish. All D.C. government offices are open. You're expected to be there at work, and the Pentagon is open, and it will be business as usual there.
In addition, because many businesses are vowing to open tomorrow, not only saying that they will open, but vowing to open, Metro says the trains will be running in and out of the district. Of course, the Pentagon and airport stations will be closed, but they say they are preparing for a normal rush hour tomorrow, and that is the schedule that they will be sticking to.
And Dell, of course, many schools are going to be closed tomorrow and classes canceled, as you can see on your screen. University of Maryland at College Park canceled tomorrow. Anne Arundel County, Beauvoir, Carrollton School, Falls Church City, National Cathedral School, classes canceled tomorrow. Also Potomac School, Prince William County, St. Agnes, St. Albans, St. Stephen's closed.
In addition, we are awaiting word right now on whether or not there will be any scheduling changes with regards to the president's address. As last we know, and as last we checked, it is still scheduled for 9 o'clock tonight.
We have Dale Solly live at the Virginia Medical Center at Arlington with the latest on the conditions of the people from the Pentagon blast who were carried and who were brought into that center. Dale?
Maureen, Virginia Hospital Center Arlington takes great pride in calling itself the official hospital of the Pentagon. Well, officially, the number of victims from the Pentagon has climbed steadily through the course of the day. It now stands at 42. 42 people have been seen here through the course of the day. 14, we understand from hospital spokespeople, have been admitted, 8 of them to intensive care. 4 of them are Arlington County firefighters injured in the aftermath of the pictures that you are looking at now. Now, we can also tell you, we got word just a few moments ago that 2 doctors from this hospital, the head of emergency services and another physician as well, were asked to come to the Pentagon tonight by the county EMS. Not necessarily to triage people who were there, but to keep an eye, to monitor the situation as EMS workers continue to search the rubble there for victims at the Pentagon. At some point, we are expecting them to come back and expecting to have a word with them at some point later on this evening. That's the situation here. The numbers have tapered off, but as I've said, they have continued to climb. Reporting live in Arlington, Dale Solly, ABC 7 News. Back to you.
Thanks, Dale.
And Dale and Maureen, as we have been fearing throughout the day, as the hours go on, the numbers will begin to trickle in with regards to the actual count. We now are understanding that of the first 400 firefighters that responded to the scene in New York, where the twin World Trade Center towers were bombed, the vice president of the city's firefighter union says that as many as half of those 400 firefighters may have perished in their efforts to save lives.
We will continue our coverage of these horrific events today. ABC 7 News at 11, of course, and we'll be with you every half hour. And now we rejoin ABC News, and Peter Jennings.
Because we were in the air when it happened, not told anything about it.
They said good luck, sleep in the airport.
And in city after city, anxious officials evacuated one building after another.
Our boss just finally came and told us, just go ahead and leave.
Not because of actual threats, but because no one knew.
There is a war.
We are a nation now on high alert, not just militarily, but psychologically, shaken on every level.
Just
for what?
See if anything happens. See if we're going to be
the uncertain emotional wave of shutting across the nation. The government buildings, but malls in Georgia, theme parks, schools everywhere. And classrooms, you could hear the anger of the generation. Kind of attack lessons until today.
They hit in the face. It's military. What is that?
America was like my superhero.
America is a defendant.
This is an generation. It is. It is back on our culture, our values.
There is a growing that what we do now will truly define.
I'd hate to see because then
we are, and I'm glad I am an American. We need, we just need to come together, and I think we will.
It will take that and much more in the coming days to see the nation, the entire nation, through this.
Head that way.
Erin Hayes, ABC News, Atlanta.
One never thinks of a citizen as being an ordinary citizen, but from those citizens, three expressions at least which are worth holding. The young man who said it's a slap at the face of the Pentagon, he couldn't imagine. The young person who said it's an attack on our culture and our country and our military. It's not really hard to say it's an attack on the American culture because there's so many cultures here at the moment, but I think you know what he means. And young people who just couldn't believe that they were seeing what they were going to witness today. But as everybody in the country has experienced today, this is a new reality for the United States. We saw it first in Oklahoma City. We've seen it in any number of threats and the growing security that has been involved with our public life in the last several years, but nothing like this. So now go to California, where a similar report for us today from ABC's David Wright.
In Minnesota, the Mall of America never opened today. In Chicago, Navy Pier and the Lincoln Park Zoo were closed. In Orlando, even the Magic Kingdom was shut down. Just about any place in America where large numbers of people were likely to gather locked the doors and sent people home.
Nothing's going to get done today. It's going to be a miserable day.
With all of the nation's airliners grounded, thousands of travelers were stranded.
I'd probably feel safer in Europe if I could actually get over there right now.
It's horrible, and as Americans, we're totally unprepared for that. We just don't think that terrorism is going to hit in our backyard.
In Los Angeles, grief counselors were brought in to meet with family members of the 3 Los Angeles-bound planes that were hijacked and used by the terrorists. In San Francisco, one of the few planes left in the skies, a flight from Thailand, was escorted in by fighter jets.
I'm really scared. I feel helpless.
The workday routine was disrupted the country over, and rush hour extended through most of the day as people struggled to get home or just someplace they perceived to be safer. In Denver, people did what they could for the victims thousands of miles away. The blood banks were full of people eager to give. Here in L.A., the entertainment industry has shut down production. Madonna canceled one of the final concerts of her national tour. The Latin Grammy Awards, scheduled for tonight, and the Emmys, scheduled for Sunday, are postponed indefinitely. And across the country, Major League Baseball has canceled its entire schedule. The disruption is likely to continue for at least a few days. Financial markets will remain closed through tomorrow, and the post office says the U.S. mail will be slowed, but will keep coming.
From California on another part of the country, from Minnesota out to the west. There are no time zones in the country today. One thing that David Wright mentioned there about baseball canceling game, this is the first time since the D-Day invasion that Major League Baseball has canceled all of its game. The first time since D-Day in the Second World War that Major League Baseball has canceled all of its game. I was very struck earlier today by what David McCullough, the noted and popular and wise historian, said when he said it's warfare 21st century style, and reminding all of us in the country who listen and read him that we haven't seen such destruction as this on our home ground, as he put it, since the Civil War. And one girl in that report saying, of course, Americans in many cases are just simply not prepared for this. ABC's Dean Reynolds is in Chicago today. And Dean, I don't quite understand what it is you have, and we'll come back to the mood of Chicago in just a moment, but there was another incident involving a plane today.
That's right, Peter. They didn't know it at the time, but the pilot and all of the passengers aboard TWA flight number 3, bound from New York's John F. Kennedy Airport to St. Louis, came perilously close to one of those planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. So close that New York Air Control told a TWA jet to take evasive action to avoid a collision.
You dodged one of the aircraft
that hit the tower?
Well, he was up there whenever we were coming from New York, so what we had to do was, they were not talking to him, and he was changing his heading and his altitude, so they just cleared us to deviate however we had to stay away from him.
It was right after they had taken off, and the passengers were horrified.
I thought we were going to crash. I thought the plane was going to crash, because when we took off, the plane kind of went down and came back up, it was kind of shaking, and it wasn't your normal taking off routine. And then you could just see like a plane that just kind of just bypassed us really close, and I said maybe it was just a mere miss.
We had him in sight, so it's a nice day in New York. We were out of the clouds, which helped a lot, so we just, you know, dodged him.
As the TWA jet ascended, others aboard said they could see a terrible sight below.
Then when we got really high up, you know, my brother's a fireman, and so I said, doesn't it look like the Trade Center's on fire? And he says, yeah, it does. It looks like a big fire.
Now, the passengers told us, Peter, that after consulting with the pilot, the flight attendants pushed the food trays up against the cockpit door, apparently to guard against a possible hijacking. In any event, the plane continued on uneventfully until it was ordered to land at Dayton, Ohio, and it landed safely.
Stay with me for just 1 second, Dean, because if you weren't with this all day, there was a time this morning when the Federal Aviation Administration, first of all, didn't allow anybody to take off, and then ordered all planes in the air over the United States to land immediately at the nearest airport, which was how a plane which begins in New York and is going west ends up in Dayton, Ohio. Dean, now can we just talk a little bit about Illinois and the central part of the country? One of the very first things that happened today was the Sears Tower in Chicago was closed. What else happened there, and what other sense of that part of the country do you now have?
Well, I got to O'Hare Airport shortly after the attack on the World Trade Center, and of course, it was basically a ghost town, except for everybody standing outside the airport waiting to get cabs elsewhere because nothing was going out of the airport. When I got into town, again, there were very few pedestrians. It was almost all police walking along the sidewalks, checking all of the state, federal, county buildings to see if there were any bombs. The police were checking to see if there were any missing buses or trucks. It was very tense here. Now, as the day has progressed, it looks as though life is returning to normal here, at least in Chicago, in the Loop area.
Thanks very much, Dean Reynolds in Chicago. We'll come back to you just to give you again some sense of the magnitude of this. The Reuters news agency reporting out of Toronto tonight makes the point that the tarmacs of airports all across Canada, from Vancouver in the west to Goose Bay in Labrador, jumping off spot if you're going to Europe, are crowded with aircraft which are either moving back and forth across the United States or across Canada or going to or from Europe. We're just all told to land. And so in all of those airports tonight, there is a huge number of aircraft, and the FAA is simply going to keep them on the ground at least for the next 12 hours and maybe longer. There was a passenger on a Northwest Airlines flight which was bound for Detroit and which was ordered by the FAA or their company to divert to Vancouver. The captain on board told the people that there was a mechanical problem, it wasn't a great issue, but they're going to Vancouver. When they got on the ground, he apologized to them for lying to them under the circumstances. It seems like the obvious thing to do. But all domestic flights in Canada were canceled as airports were closed down because nobody had the vaguest idea whether or not there was something else going on up there. And earlier today, you may recall that we heard the British Prime Minister Tony Blair talking about this, and it wasn't long before I don't know of any other European city involved, but certainly he ordered that aircraft should not be allowed to fly in the airspace over London. And so this was repeated time and time and time again in a variety of places. But in just one place, St. John's International Airport in Newfoundland, which is a pretty small place, has taken in 27 aircraft today with 5,000 passengers. That may be St. John's, New Brunswick. I'm not altogether sure. It's St. John's, Newfoundland, St. John's, New Brunswick. And it may be either in New Brunswick. You just get some sense of aircraft just being ordered to bail out from wherever they're going and to get on the ground. John Nance, our aviation analyst, is with us. And John, it's probably you should be talking much more about this than I am. But add some more to this general overall air crisis today.
The only time, Peter, that we have ever in our history, certainly in the jet age, ever had a situation in which jetliners were parked all over the place was in the air traffic control strike of 1981, when we had basically a cessation of services by most of the air traffic controllers, but not all of them. Even then, there were still flights flying. This is unprecedented except for that time in history, and even going back into the latter days after World War II, I'm not aware of any time that we put all the air traffic on the ground.
John, I'm just looking at how widespread this is. It says here 34 flights were diverted to Vancouver, 25 were diverted to Toronto. One was diverted to Whitehorse, which is in the Canadian Yukon. In the Yukon. And after the plane reported communications and fuel difficulty. This must have just been the most. We know what we're dealing with in terms of tragedy and casualty and chaos, but it must have just been an unbelievable day for the aviation authorities.
Well, totally chaotic in every possible way. One thing that we can be very thankful for is that a number of years ago, the FAA established a central control system, which is now housed in Herndon, Virginia. It's like a mission control. We've actually, we had cameras there on New Year's Eve back there on the Millennium. But this gives us the capability of coordinating all the air traffic control centers, all the control towers throughout North America, and being able to shut the system down. But imagine the air crews on those flight decks trying to get an idea of why in the world they're being told to land someplace other than their destination. The confusion factor there alone has got to be horrendous, especially the fact that when you're told to land at any suitable airport, not every airliner can land everywhere, and there are a lot of decisions that have to be made very rapidly.
John, when
the air traffic...
My apologies, I'm terribly sorry, go on.
No, all I was saying was that the radio traffic that has to occur between the pilots and their company to find out where in the world the dispatcher wants you to go, that alone was a monstrous problem, certainly for American and Delta and United and all the big airlines.
Now, you're a pilot, a commercial pilot as well, flown for major airlines, Alaska Airways, as I recall. You're a commercial pilot in an aircraft today. Does your company tell you from the ground that not one but two and perhaps three aircraft in the country have been hijacked? And what do you do then?
I really am going to be interested to know whether or not that information was passed that way. Usually you're just given a command and not told the reason why, because there's too much concern that broadcasting that out over radio frequencies may somehow exacerbate the problem. You know, you're in unknown territory. But I would imagine that there were enough out there who were told that the level of tension was very high.
John,
certainly you're going to be looking at your door.
When we heard that one case of the drinks trolley being brought up and pushed against the cabin door by the members of the crew of one particular aircraft because they clearly had some sense of what was going on. John, what have you managed to learn throughout the day in terms of the aircraft which ultimately were crashed with that enormous loss of life? Anything to add there?
Well, only this, Peter. We touched on it briefly before, and that is the tantalizing clue, if you will, that we have two Boeing 757s and two Boeing 767s, and those are subject to what we call a common type rating. In other words, if you're trained in one, you can fly the other. Boeing built them that way to minimize training differentials in the airline business. Perhaps that's simply coincidental, and perhaps it's very pointed here in terms of how this was planned. These aircraft, too, when you consider the amount of fuel that was on board transatlantic or transcontinental flights, and we have to consider that there's a high probability that these flights were selected because they would have a lot of fuel, you wouldn't have to put extra explosives on, and you could create a flying bomb that not only involves 300 to 400,000 pounds with a kinetic energy of 200 to 250 knots or greater, but also the, not explosive, but the burning power, incendiary power of all that fuel, which we saw do these horrible things in the Trade Center case.
So as you look at these events today, these two events, which are really three events, which are really four events if you consider the fourth crash.
Yes, indeed, four.
And the amount of fuel and the explosive power, as we certainly saw at the Pentagon and at the trade towers, do you think anybody would have needed to take additional explosives on board? There was enough explosion potential in the gasoline itself.
I think I wouldn't be surprised when we finally get this unraveled, Peter, if there was a structural engineer on the other side of the world that had been very much involved in planning this. Because those decisions would have been involved, what does it take to bring down that structure in each particular case? I think that this was probably something not left to chance, but it also is a very wise thing if you're going to do a hellacious act like this, to figure, well, we don't have to put additional explosives in. We make the airplane a flying bomb simply by which one we select.
Thank you very much, John Nance, and we shall come back to you. What we're looking at here, of course, is a videotape from a variety of different angles today. All of it just repeatedly bringing home the horror of the attack on the trade towers. We did not see the aircraft. We've seen no evidence of any video of the aircraft actually hitting the Pentagon. It came from the south. We do know that the people on board were aware they'd been hijacked because the wife of the Solicitor General of the United States, the administration's lawyer, basically, argues cases before the Supreme Court, was on board one of them and died, of course, along with all of the other people, and describes a pretty horrifying circumstances of being aware that they had been made hostages, no longer passengers. And we also had an eyewitness report from the vicinity of the Pentagon earlier today, which said the aircraft came in very low, and it had to come in very low because the Pentagon's only a 6-story building, John McCarthy told us at the Pentagon, and was knocking off lampposts, or sorry, power posts, telephone posts, as it came up from the south to attack that. In the middle, I want to talk to our medical editor, Dr. Tim Johnson, about how great the need may really be for this disaster tonight in medical terms. The Attorney General has been talking about it. First, I want to go to Midtown at ABC, Midtown New York City, that is, and ABC's Diane Sawyer. Diane?
Peter, I don't know how much you can see down here, but we have heavy mobilization. We have cranes coming in. We have bulldozers, generators, lights coming in because, of course, city power is out. I'm told they're coming in part to uncover the rubble from a subway station that partially collapsed. Also, they're going to take a look at the rubble closer up. If you can move the camera in, you can see the gray haze, which is the smoke from what is still burning. Not only the rubble of the 2 tall towers this morning that were blasted, but also that third building, the 47-story Tishman building, which had been evacuated. And then we're told that the Marriott Hotel is still on fire, but firefighters have given up on that right now. So right now, building's still on fire. Everybody evacuated down there. I'm going to bring in Don Taylor once more for a couple of footnotes of this scene, Peter, because he's been walking the streets all day.
Ask him to
Don,
speak
you
up.
saw a jet engine. You saw a turbine engine.
Yeah, it was obviously an engine from a large jet that is over on the left-hand side about 2 blocks down this way. It landed on what I think was a phone booth, but it was charred. Obviously, the insides did not have the outer shell anymore, but it looked like the inner workings of a jet engine.
And again, we're talking blocks and blocks away, Peter, so imagine the trajectory of that engine's flight. Another thing you told me, which has such a poignancy to it, you said when you walked the scene up at the Trade Center devastation, that you were knee-deep in a carpet of financial documents.
Right. Well, we were talking about the implications of this on world markets, this being probably the center of the world of finance, and nowhere was that more dramatically demonstrated than what were millions and millions of documents. I looked at financial documents, stock certificates, employment records, just lying around. Many of them were charred. It's obvious. And when you saw the explosion, you saw a cascade of paper come off these buildings, and that's what it was.
We're told it's as far away as 3 miles, Peter. And I should just say that every time you stop here, someone comes up from the EMS or from the firefighters and the police just to tell you the names of people they know who went in before them and they're not sure came out.
Thanks very much, Diane Sawyer. I must tell you, for the future, it's very hard to hear you down there because of the emergency equipment that's working in Midtown. I'm sure your engineers will tell you if we could move you just a little bit away from that, we'd like very much to hear as clearly as we can, obviously, under the circumstances, what you were saying. Just thinking for a second there about the thousands of people who are outside the country, when you think that one airport in eastern Canada had 27 aircraft and 5,000 people, and it's happening all the way across the continent, people stranded tonight. And one assumes, though, the cell phone network in the United States, at least today, certainly in the eastern United States, was jammed with people trying to make calls related to this incident, the press, government officials, emergency officials. One assumes, because we haven't got any phone numbers for you, I'm afraid, of people in other places tonight who are expected to be somewhere else, and they all appear, as far as we can tell by the reporting that we're getting from a variety of places, are okay. They're just spending a night in some place they did not intend to be. We've had a couple of chances today to talk to Jerry Hauer, who is the man who set up New York City's emergency headquarters on the west side of Manhattan, right down there by the trade towers, which is no longer usable today because it was, if not one of the first, one of the early victims of these two extraordinary collapses of the two trade tower buildings. But he's with us again tonight. Jerry, grateful that you came back. You just tell us what you know that's going on.
Well, there's a massive effort underway right now, Peter, to get medical resources into the city. As you heard earlier, Secretary Thompson has mobilized a number of Department of Health and Human Services, DMAT teams, DMORT teams, which are the mortuary teams. They are bringing in the Comfort, which is a naval ship that is a hospital ship that will help provide resources and much-needed beds. Joe Albaugh, the director of FEMA, is coordinating the federal government's effort to assist the city and Washington, D.C. And there will be numerous urban search and rescue teams coming into the city to aid with dogs, with search equipment, to aid New York City's firefighters, because clearly this is going to be a long-term operation. Our firefighters here in the city, our police and emergency medical services have been absolutely heroic today in their efforts. A number of them have become victims in the process today in trying to rescue people in these buildings, and the fatigue will set in, but they are the consummate professionals. They will do everything they can to continue to try and search for victims, but there will come a point very soon where once the fire is out, they will start to pick through the rubble.
Jerry,
yes.
Let me interrupt you and even be more specific, if I may. Mike Carter is the Vice President of the Firefighters Union, estimates that half of the 400 firefighters who first reached the scene at the trade tower may be dead. And here's what he says: we have entire companies that are just missing. We have lost chiefs. And Cardinal Edward Egan, the Roman Catholic cardinal in New York City, who administered the last rites to a dozen victims, said the firefighters and the police were dead in great numbers. Now, I don't mean to reach out for numbers except to quantify the scope of this disaster, much of which we can see on our face. But what can you add to those two comments?
Well, first of all, many of those people, the chiefs that I heard on the radio as I was listening to this evolve are very close personal friends. Many of the police officers, the emergency service unit, these are the people that were the first responders, the first two rescue units, the first two fire units. We're all in the building either doing rescues or firefighting, and they transmitted a third alarm almost immediately, which is upwards of 150 to maybe 200 firefighters, and then they rapidly brought in more resources. They transmitted a fifth alarm and then an additional fifth alarm. So there were hundreds and hundreds of firefighters and police officers trying to save the people in those buildings. And to try and quantify it at this point, how many people?
No, I didn't mean to make you do that. I just want to know whether or not you were aware of what the head of the Firefighters Union and Cardinal Egan has said in terms of the dimension of the disaster for the fire department.
Absolutely, and some very, very senior people in the fire department are missing. Some very senior chiefs. Some of the specialty units, the rescue units, it's same in the police department. Some of the senior police officials, the inspectors that were on the scene, the emergency service units. These people are true heroes that were going in and paid the ultimate sacrifice in trying to rescue New Yorkers.
Now, let me ask you one other thing.
Sure.
The mayor has gone out of his way today to say there are...
From ABC 7 News, this is a special report. Continuing coverage, America Under Attack.
Good evening. I'm Maureen Bunyan with Del Walters at ABC 7. We want to bring you up to date on the local situation here in the wake of today's devastating attacks here at the Pentagon. First, we want to tell you parents and also some of you young people out there about the condition of your schools and what you have to do tomorrow. We are told that Fairfax County schools are closed tomorrow. We are also told that Montgomery County schools are closed. Fairfax and Montgomery County schools are closed. However, government workers in those two counties are expected to come to work. Also, we want to show you what is open. Federal offices are open tomorrow in the district and in this area. Unscheduled leave is in effect. D.C. government offices are open, and the Pentagon is open for business as usual, we are told. Meantime, the district is still in a state of emergency, but Mayor Williams is expected to announce soon whether that state of emergency will be lifted tomorrow. If it is lifted, of course, D.C. workers, all D.C. workers are expected to be at work, and if the state of emergency is lifted, mail delivery will resume in the district.
In the meantime, we are now receiving reports of what may be the first good news that we have received throughout the day. You may recall that earlier, Maryland Governor Paris Glendening reported that as many as 11 sites across the state of Maryland may have been targets of a terrorist attack. We can now say that a 23-year-old man has been arrested and charged by Maryland State Police with making a false report of a crime, apparently reporting that those areas were targets when they were not. We're also receiving reports now of the extraordinary efforts to save lives. 50 square feet of human skin is being driven from a hospital in Texas to here in Northern Virginia to help with the burn victims in Arlington. And we are now going to go live to ABC 7 News reporter John Harder, who's down on the National Mall, to update us on what the situation is in D.C. John?
Del, we have just learned that the federal government is putting into place contingency plans for non-emergency agencies. As I speak, government workers are being called from these agencies and told to go to locations such as West Virginia, Richmond, and other places where they may continue the government's work safely out of town until this emergency is over. At 7 p.m., we saw President Bush's helicopter land over there at the White House. Instead of the normal 2 escort choppers, he had 4 escorts, the last one being a huge gunship. In half an hour, the president will address the nation from the White House. Now, in more than 3 decades of covering Washington, I have never seen this level of security. Streets and roads are closed around the Pentagon. For instance, Route 110, 395 are closed. Closed for 2 and 3 blocks around the White House, the State Department, the Capitol. And I have never seen so many police officers and federal guards at federal installations all around the city. That's the situation here at the mall. Reporting live, I'm John Harder, ABC 7 News. Back to you, Dale.
And John, it is a good thing with your 3 decades here. They know you very well. Thank you, John.
We do want to repeat, of course, what John just told you. President Bush is expected to speak to the nation about these tragedies today. Apparently, in the next half hour, around 8:30. Of course, we will carry that live for you.
We now want to take you back to ABC's news coverage of the situation, and we're going to take a live shot of the Pentagon to bring you up to date on the situation there, the visual up to date of the situation as the rescue efforts continue inside the Pentagon at this hour.
Clearly as quickly as we can, but deal with one thing at a time. Our medical editor, Tim Johnson, is here. Tim, we've heard mentioned several times very early on that burn victims here had gone as far away as burn centers in Canada, some of which are very efficient and well known. Is New York, at least in terms of burn centers, overwhelmed, not able? Do you have any sense of this?
Well, I would guess it might well be, because burns are among the most difficult and demanding of all trauma injuries to take care of. Demanding in terms of personnel, of medical resources, of space, long-term care. The 2 huge, overwhelming problems with severe burns are fluid loss, which can lead to shock and quick death, and then long-term infection. Enormous problems taking care of the infections that result with serious burns. And so the care of these people really is something that demands long-term care and a lot of resources and a lot of personnel, and it can very quickly overwhelm even a major city like New York.
And so New York may have an adequate number of burn centers, but not
for the ordinary burn cases that occur in everyday life, but not for the kinds of injuries and numbers that may come out of this.
And the most middle-sized cities, which might have been what we call the tri-state area, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey have burn centers?
They have burn centers, but limited numbers of beds in most of those cities. We're going to have to talk about major cities, Boston, Chicago, cities in Canada, elsewhere, to take care of numbers that might well come out of this kind of a disaster.
And we're going to go to the triage center in a moment and talk to ABC's Cynthia McFadden, who's been there waiting like so many other people. But explain to people again just basically what happens in triage. It's a question of selecting who to take care of and who to put aside.
Absolutely. You have limited resources by definition, and you have to decide who is most likely to benefit from those resources. Some you can put aside for later care. Others are so near death that any care is not going to be possible, so you focus on the ones that need immediate emergency care and have a chance of survival.
And it must be one of the toughest decisions that a doctor ever has to make.
It is. I worked in an emergency room for 15 years, and that is among the toughest decisions, of course.
I believe, by the way, and this is particularly relevant to the New York audience, we won't necessarily find the phone number here, but when Mayor Giuliani and the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of the FBI in New York, and the governor were all giving a news conference some time ago, the mayor had said, "Everybody don't feel any hate and anger, be New Yorkers, pull together," and the governor had said, you know, that we will, of course, get through this. He did point out that there was a true, genuine need for blood donors. And then I think we heard exactly the same thing from Attorney General Ashcroft, who said that anybody in the country who wanted to participate or felt they could give something, one of the things was to contact their local Red Cross center, because, as we know, there's a shortage of blood in the country. And the governor also, that they like it if doctors volunteer and nurses volunteered. Catastrophic shortages in the country, and burden doctors, nurses, military, Tim, pretty much as I understand, they get civilian help as well. The military is pretty much able to take care of most circumstances, right?
It is. The majority of injuries in the, and I expect the majority from the crush injuries of, again, burn, very special category, requires special kinds of care. And
we also, and I think we actually know that 3 ships of the U.S. Navy on their way to New York, which the U.S. has come, is a hospital, 1,100 on its way, dispatched by the Health and Human Services and the military. And the aircraft carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy and the George Washington, are coming as well, on their way from farther down the East Coast to be put in New York Harbor, lest they are needed for a variety of reasons. And these aircraft carriers, particularly, and the Comfort, are hugely capable of taking care of casualties in a wide variety of ways. Hang on, Dr. Tim, we'll come back to you in just a second. But I do want to go to Cynthia McFadden, who is at the triage center itself. Cynthia, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
So just bring us up to date with what's happened there since we last checked you.
Well, Peter, we're still standing by waiting. There are still hundreds of doctors and nurses here waiting. The grim realities are that they expect to tag hundreds, perhaps thousands of victims of this explosion throughout the night tonight. The reason the ambulances are still sitting empty at this point is because we understand from rescue workers they have not been able to get close enough to the actual midpoint of the explosion to actually bring anybody out, which is the reason that they are still standing by. They've told us the system here, Peter, I heard you talking about setting up a triage system. The system here will be as follows. Victims who come in and are tagged red are victims that they believe can be saved. Victims who are tagged yellow and green are walking wounded and will be quickly taken away to other locations. And then there are the black tags for those people who they feel they cannot help.
Thanks, Cynthia. We'll come back to you. I want to go quickly to Stoystown, Pennsylvania, the one where ABC's Dan Harris is standing by. 4 aircraft involved today, and we know that on each one of them there was a hijacking in process. And the aircraft that crashed near Johnstown, Pennsylvania, was United Flight 93 with 38 passengers and 7 crew on board. ABC's Dan Harris rushed to the scene of that accident, and I hope is with us now. Dan, do you hear me?
Peter, I do hear you. And we have a new piece of information on this crash from ABC's Lisa Stark, who, as you know, covers aviation for ABC News. She tells us that Flight 93, which, as you mentioned, was departing from Newark and headed to San Francisco, filed for a change of flight plan request, requesting to change its destination from San Francisco to Washington. Shortly after that, it turned around and crashed about a mile from where we are right now in Stoystown, Pennsylvania. It crashed, and I believe we have some pictures of the crash scene. Crashed in an open field. All that you really see there is a huge crater. You can't even see it very well from our vantage point. A huge black gaping hole, as investigators are describing it. There is a lot of debris, most of it very small pieces of black charred remains. The FBI tonight is making a huge grid, and tomorrow morning it will begin what it calls a painstaking process of gathering the evidence. At this point, they say they're treating this as a crime, though they won't go so far as to say it is indeed an act of terrorism. If indeed the plane had successfully turned around and headed back toward Washington, and now it appears there would have been one more target, it did not make it, which is fortunate for Washington, unfortunate for the 45 people on board. No survivors, Peter.
Dan, it was indeed a chilling moment when you made a reference there to United Flight 93 asking for a change of flight plan, headed for San Francisco, asking for a flight plan that takes it to Washington. Have you picked up anything else on the ground tonight?
We have picked up from the FBI that there was 911 contact from the plane. Now, they wouldn't go so far as to confirm a report that has been circulating. The report says that one of the passengers locked himself in the bathroom of that plane and called 911 at 9:58 a.m., got in touch with a local 911 operator in this part of Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, and told him there had been some sort of explosion on the plane. Shortly after that, 2 minutes later, in fact, the plane did go down. That report is not confirmed in total. In some, however, the FBI says it has received tapes of a 911 call, and it is going to go over those tapes.
Just help us place Stoystown, Pennsylvania, a little more, with a little greater familiarity to people. You're fairly close to Johnstown?
We are fairly close to Johnstown. Stoystown is about 75 miles southeast of Pittsburgh and about 30 miles north of Maryland. It's a very rural area, and the area where the crash happened is really very, very rural. It's an open field, and as I said, there is a huge crater. There were some eyewitnesses, coal workers, who ran to the scene shortly after the crash. We've heard that they saw the plane going down. It was very unstable before it went down, as you might imagine. People who live nearby say they heard they felt the ground shake miles away. People who went to the scene, we spoke to one eyewitness a short time ago, said she saw lots of debris, but nothing very big. And in fact, that's what our pictures are bearing out, that the debris is very, very small. This made a very hard landing, Peter.
Thanks very much, Dan Harris, in Stoystown, Pennsylvania tonight on the United Airlines flight, which started off from Newark to San Francisco, took off about 8:01. You see where it all converges? The first attack on the trade tower is just before 9 o'clock. The second one is after that an aircraft goes down at, sometime 8:35, between 8:30, maybe a little after 9 o'clock. And so the coordination involved in this has intelligence and military officials tonight confused, shocked, and steamed. Barbara Starr, one of our reporters at the Pentagon, reports tonight, quoting a senior intelligence official, our top priority tonight is nailing the SOBs who did this. And they are, Barbara reports us, tweaking every single intelligence system they have, their reconnaissance, their assets. And then they're going to go through, as we've heard earlier today, through all of the cable traffic. They're going to listen to all of the monitoring, which the National Security Agency does, of thousands of phone calls. And again, though this may not lead to anything, just a short while ago, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, who's a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, told the Associated Press that U.S. intelligence intercepted communications between supporters of Osama bin Laden discussing the attacks on the World Trade Center. And he then goes on to say, I'm just going to get his quote accurately here, they have an intercept of some information that included people associated with bin Laden who acknowledged a couple of targets were hit. I'm not sure how much that tells us at this point. They may simply having been reacting, if this report is true, they may simply have been reacting, as many people all over the world did immediately, to the fact that these attacks had actually occurred. It's not going to be very long from now before the president. I'm missing anything, John, before I go back to Washington and talk politics?
No, we're up to date.
Okay. John McCarthy, outside the Pentagon. unusually removed from your post, which I know must be very frustrating at this point, John. Want to add to Barbara Starr's reporting in terms of attitude on behalf of the military at the moment?
Well, attitude and what you described as the intelligence community is now doing is a major wash. They are going after every agent they have all over the globe. They are focusing every piece of technology they have. They are desperately looking for answers to who did it, so they can then better go after who did it with what undoubtedly, I now believe, is going to be a series of military strikes. But you cannot do that until you have a very focused piece of intelligence that leads you directly to the culprits. And then there is, of course, the problem, once you decide you are going to use military force, of trying to decide how to make it in any way effective. It does feel good oftentimes to retaliate against accused people that you believe have done a terrible act like this to the United States, but it doesn't necessarily go after them and often creates additional problems, especially if it is proved that the terrorists who did this came from a region near the Middle East, like Afghanistan. That is going to set off a whole series of very complex political machinations, Peter, that could end up coming back on the United States.
But let me ask you an operational question, John. We believe at the moment that the United States had no inkling of what was going to happen. But there's a history of terrorism in various other parts of the world, of which the United States has been party victimized by in one way or the other. After an incident has occurred, is there any history of a tendency of people who perpetrated the terrorism to talk?
There is a history to claim credit in some way. Although I must say, Osama bin Laden, if he turns out to be the culprit who is behind this, has been often circumspect in the days and months after an attack. Intelligence sources have indicated in previous attacks that his organization was involved, but they had to piece that information together because he was, at least in the initial period after the attack, absolutely silent.
Thank you very much, John Lopez. We have a microphone open somewhere else, and I think just trying to pick up the sound that it is in our Washington position across from the White House. It's appropriate because we want to go there now where Claire Shipman has been for most of the day. And Claire, the President, I think, is going, you tell us clearly, the President's going to talk to us, I think, fairly quickly now, pretty soon now?
That's right. He's going to talk to us, we're told, in just over 10 minutes, Peter. And I think what you've been talking about tonight, a lot
Claire,
of
let me stop. Can I stop you? Maybe you'd move your microphone up. I'm sorry. There's a microphone, I believe, in your little location there, which is interfering with what you are trying to say. So do you want to try again?
All right. Is this any better?
It's somewhat better, yeah.
Good. Okay. Rough conditions here. But you've been talking about a lot of the anger being expressed in Washington tonight from military officials and others, and I think that is the sort of thing we're going to hear from the President tonight. We've been told he is quite angry. He's eager to talk about it. We're told his speech is going to be a mix of condolence, anger, and also retaliation, that he wants to make it very plain just how quickly he intends to act when he feels the United States is able to act. He and his aides still putting finishing touches on this speech. Probably hard to exaggerate the enormous importance of this speech for him tonight, Peter. A couple of other notes. Condoleezza Rice is at the White House with him as National Security Advisor. Colin Powell arrived recently back in Washington at Andrews Air Force Base, and we're told might be heading to the White House, but that depends on some security issues. The President was to meet with Vice President Cheney once he arrived back at the White House, and then we were told from security forces that he was going to have to leave the White House. They didn't want to keep the President and the Vice President for very long in the same location, and he would either be heading home or to Camp David. Peter.
Thanks very much, Claire. We're going to come back to you very shortly because the President is going to talk. And in fact, Colin Powell just came back from Colombia today, where he has been, he's been visiting with leaders of Latin America about, among other things, the war against the international drug community, which is based very largely in Colombia. And there is no reason that any part of the world tonight should be, whatever our instincts are, whatever the history is, there's no reason tonight to rule out criminals from any part of the world who have the money, if not always the sophistication. That's a big, big question in terms of trying to resolve today, to have mounted this attack against the United States, though, as always, the intelligence community has gone almost immediately to Osama bin Laden as a principal suspect. And we don't yet know why they have done that, but it seems to be something of a tradition. It was great to see. It was really great to see the members of Congress gather and sing God Bless America, and to tell the country and the world that the country's hanging together. But there was a time earlier today when the Capitol City was just closing down as absolutely fast as they could get it closed down. Take a look at this report from ABC's Michelle Norris.
With the Pentagon burning in the distance, the nation's capital was evacuated.
This is the first time we had a mandatory evacuation of the Capitol and the House and Senate office buildings.
Bewildered employees got out as fast as they could, while key congressional leaders were carefully whisked away to safe and undisclosed locations. Top leaders from throughout the administration were immediately placed under special protection.
The leaders are in undisclosed locations for their own safety and to ensure that we can reconstitute decision-making when that's appropriate.
The United States Secret Service immediately secured the President, the Vice President, and the Speaker of the House, and they are all safe.
It's all part of official Washington's civil defense plan to ensure that the federal government continues to function smoothly even while the nation is under attack.
And they basically have a playbook initially to assess how serious is this threat. Do we need to have a lot of people move very far away from Washington, or do we just need to have a few key backup people get outside of the immediate downtown area?
During the Cold War, the federal government developed an elaborate evacuation plan to make sure top leaders would survive a nuclear attack by taking them to a series of secret bunkers just outside Washington. Today, that wasn't necessary, but nonetheless, the nation's top decision makers remain under very heavy protection.
Making sure that the federal government continues to function, I think, is very important in a time of crisis because it reassures the public that somebody is in charge and the situation is well in hand.
And in today's time of crisis, Americans, as well as many elsewhere in the world, will be looking for that reassurance. Michelle Norris, ABC News, Washington.
Information is pouring into our newsroom from everywhere. Trying to understand this, here's a message from a friend who happens to be an architectural engineer who knows something about the World Trade Center and who believes that a member of the family may have been killed in the Trade Center at all. It's been impossible for it. We've only had one person, at least on this broadcast, identified all day, and that is the wife of the Solicitor General of the United States, who managed to call her husband from the aircraft that was hijacked and then subsequently attacked the Pentagon. But he, an engineer and an architect, speculates here that the heat above the crash site on the Twin Trade Towers may have indeed caused the building above to melt, just simply collapsing in itself and putting enormous weight on the rest of the building below, which could not possibly stand it. And the steel columns which go up through the building, built to code at best, would only be able, he believes, to have been able to stand an hour and a half of intense fire like this, pressing down on the rest of the building until it finally was able to give way. It was a very well-built building, probably better, given its size and the attention and everything else, much better than similar buildings built today because it was the first of its style. And as we know, in many American cities as well as overseas, there are a lot more daring architectural structures of this magnitude in many parts of the world today. And in Asia particularly, people building these astonishingly high buildings as showplaces, almost a competition going on in the rest of the world as to who can build the tallest, most daring building. Well, there's a very simple, long box structure built well, according to the engineers who know it. And the heat of that fire from those penetrations of the two aircraft, in his view, may have made the difference. It will take us time to find out. John Miller, latest.
There's really no change other than rescue operations have started now at the World Trade Center, ones that were hampered because of the impending collapse of 7 World Trade Center, the third building to go down. Bodies have started to be brought to the morgue, but only in very small numbers now. That's going to be a massive operation that continues. And of course, as we've all discussed, the mounting of a massive federal investigation in tandem with the intelligence community's assistance to the military to try to put a name to this.
I wonder if anybody else is as aware as I am at the moment. I'm sure people are aware as I am at the moment of previous investigations we have done of far lesser incidents. Attack on TWA 800 is one. The investigation at the Al-Khobar Towers, which was conducted by retired General Wayne Downing, who's with us in our Washington Bureau. We'll talk to him after the president tonight. If you all of these investigations have gone on and on and on and on, and many of them just really didn't resolve anything in the final analysis.
Yet many of them did. The largest acts of terrorism on U.S. soil, ironically the bombing of the World Trade Center, the attacks in East Africa have been solved to the extent that people have been charged. Many have been brought back to this country. The FBI actually has a terrific track record that way in chasing these leads out to the ends of the earth. We were talking about something a minute ago, though, that is part of the fog of war in these things. After the Al-Khobar explosion, there were intercepts of people calling Osama bin Laden's headquarters to congratulate him. And in these intercepts, there was no, he didn't say, well, thanks, but it wasn't me. Now the government is taking the position that it was the Iranians. So you really have to sort through the information very carefully before you choose your suspect.
Yeah, I just simply wish to make the point that it's going to take a long time, and that the impatience that we all feel about striking back at somebody who's done this thing to the country is not going to be requited, I think, for very long. ABC's Pierre Thomas, by the way, reports that his FBI sources are telling him that several people on board two of the planes which went down, this would be the one in the Pentagon, at least one of those coming either to New York or to Pennsylvania, were able to get out on their cell phones and call their relatives. And they described horrific scenes on board the aircraft, people being attacked and stabbed on board the aircraft itself. We've heard at least one piece of information that the weapon of choice, at least on one of the aircraft, was a box cutter, what professionals and sometimes amateur use with the razor blade through it that enables you to open up cardboard boxes in a hurry, and has, of course, been a weapon of crime with which we're all familiar. And as John Miller, who knows more about these things than most, pointed out easily, you take a plastic one on board and it's very hard for a security device to detect. But I want to go quickly to Midtown New York City again, just before we go to the president, and get a quick update from Diane Sawyer. Diane?
Peter, I'm standing out here, and as you can see around me, there's a dramatic change in activity, and I don't know how much you could hear earlier when we were telling you about it, but we have 6 bulldozers down here now. We have an entire line, an entire street full of EMS crews and ambulances. It appears they have got the lights up. The generators are working, and it's very possible they could be moving in soon for some kind of activity actually on the site. And I've got Don Daler here with me. We've been dividing up all the duties here, and he's been down to the scene. And also J.D. Halpern, who said he's just a volunteer who came in from California and was around the area. I just wanted to know, how much fire is there? You said you were just at ground zero. How much fire is left?
Well, the building 7, there was no fire there whatsoever, but there was one truck putting water on the building, but it's collapsed completely. And then the other building that there were some flames still coming up was in World Trade Center 1, but not a lot.
And you said you saw melted tour buses, melted cars?
The cars that were right down there, it was just unbelievable. They were twisted and melted into nothing. The debris is just unbelievable. And then you can see fire trucks and police vehicles that were down there early that all their windows, the windshields are completely blown out. Must have been from when debris dropped.
We can even see from here that the smoke seems to have gone down, Don. And I want to repeat, Peter, because J.D. was saying, as well as Don earlier, in case you didn't hear us, that it is carpeted up there. It is ankle deep in papers.
In some places, papers and debris go up 2 or 3 feet high. You have to wade through in some areas.
These are financial documents.
Yeah, the ones I looked at, many of them were financial documents, very personal documents that when I saw the first explosion that hit, there was just a snow cascade of paper, and the whole area down there is just coated with it.
Well, Peter, again, we'll let you know as soon as we can confirm that they are going in to the site. We should say that the mayor was here just a minute ago and drove by, waved at us, but would not stop. Back to you.
Diane, just exactly where are you?
We're about 4.5 blocks from ground zero.
Okay, thanks very much, Diane Sawyer. Don Daler. Don Daler did a wonderful job for us earlier today, giving us some sense of what was happening as close as you could get to the scene. And I'm also joined now by ABC's George Stephanopoulos, who's been downtown all today. And so we'll have a chance to revisit that scene from a variety of locations after we hear from the president, because it's 8:30 Eastern Time, 3:30 in the West, and we are about to hear from the President of the United States. I think most of you know that the President has been on something of a strange journey today. He went off to Florida to promote education. He was in Florida when this occurred. He was then literally taken up by the security apparatus which surrounds him, and taken off first to Louisiana, where he touched down at an Air Force base. We didn't know what was going to happen next. He was then taken off to Nebraska, to the old Strategic Air Command, one of the old Strategic Air Command bases from the Cold War days, put into a bunker or down the rabbit hole, as it was described to us. ABC's Ann Compton was with him all day and talked all day about the struggle between the security and the political apparatus, whether the president can get back to Washington. Well, the president is back in Washington now, and there has been no time in his presidency, and there may never be a time like this again, when it has been so important what he says to the country, because I think we all know at moments like this, the country looks to the President of the United States for understanding, for knitting the country together, and some presidents do it brilliantly, and some do not. Here is Mr. Bush. Okay, this was well, the president isn't sitting there trying to think about what to say, I can assure you. The president is sitting there because someone on network television has sat him down and said, we'll cue you in 30 seconds, Mr. Bush. And so, as awkward as it looks to him, this is what we've expected him to do. And now here he is.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
The President of the United States, when he is in many respects needed most. And we've been joined, by George Stephanopoulos, who's been downtown all day and who very quickly picked up, George, that the President may have given us a hint in his first couple of lines there to the magnitude of this.
He said thousands of lives that were suddenly ended, the first number we've had all day by an official verifying the magnitude of the casualties. Thousands of lives suddenly ended. He also did a lot of other things in this very short speech, Peter. He gave voice to the anger that many Americans are feeling. He talked about the quiet, unyielding anger of America, and then was very pointed in giving reassurance. The military is prepared. The emergency teams are on their way. Government will be back to business tomorrow. Our economy will be back to business tomorrow. And then finally, Peter, what I found most interesting in the section about where he talked about retaliation, he said America would make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them, which is a message to any state which may be supporting these terrorists who are behind this act.
Well, which creates a huge dilemma for the United States of America, because if it is discovered, as we've talked several times throughout the day, that a state, and I've forgotten who it was, a former director of the CIA perhaps earlier today, who said he couldn't believe that a state would actually support Jim Woolsey, former director of CIA, who said directly he couldn't believe that a state would actively support an act such as this, though it may have over periods of time, as Iran and Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan have all been suspected to do, give collateral or
and that's
indirect support down through the years.
The word that the president used was so expansive, Peter. It wasn't just supported or funded. It was any who harbored them, who may have given them sanctuary at any time. That is a very open-ended commitment.
And then I thought, by the way, also, if I may add, that this president particularly, who feels so strongly about his Christianity, felt it a good time to say, to quote those lines from Psalm 23, even though I walk, or yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil, because God with me. And that will thus sit so appropriately, I believe, in the minds and the sentiments of many Americans tonight. And we've felt throughout the day, we heard scattered reports of people going to churches and saying a prayer for those people who may or may not be lost, and for the families of those people around the country. Because don't forget, relatives in these locations have relatives all over the country. This is a total engagement with the nation. And I think you pretty much covered it all, except for one thing, George. The President talked also about the sense of safety and security of young people in America, particularly, who were threatened today. And we heard that from people around the country today, people who simply could not believe, as it was the case at Oklahoma City, that this was happening in the United States. It's always something that happens somewhere else.
Or in the movies. And this is far worse than any plot that anyone could have ever devised. And I think I was downtown, as you mentioned today, Peter, so it was more surreal there, almost because people were so determined to get back to the normal life, even as the rest, all of downtown was being closed off. So I was a little bit cut off from what was happening around the country, but you did feel it down there.
But I think this is very characteristic of New York, and probably would have been characteristic of any major community in the country, any other community as well. Terry Moran covers Mr. Bush for us today, but ironically was with him today as he went on this education trip, not on normal. I think you are now, Terry, back at your regular location on the north lawn of the White House. Does that mean the White House has loosened up just a little bit?
Well, it has, Peter. The White House has leapt to life after several hours of the White House compound itself and the blocks around it in Washington essentially being deserted, a ghost town really coming in here. It is now a beehive of activity with government officials, cabinet secretaries. The president, of course, has returned. The First Lady has returned, and they are now working well into the night on this crisis. The president that you saw in these remarks, we are told, is the man who absorbed this tragedy today. He was described as steely throughout the day, as someone who did not react with great emotion or anger, who was able to see the pictures that America saw while he was in the air in Air Force One and reacted very seriously, very soberly, pretty much as we saw him tonight.
Now, you say that the White House is up and running again, full in action, though the White House is clearly never completely out of action, no matter where it is. But what do you actually mean by that? What are they doing?
Well, what we are seeing right now is the president and his top advisors huddled in the Oval Office and in the study off the Oval Office. We saw cabinet secretaries and FEMA Director Joe Albaugh were here earlier, and Joe Albaugh is still here. He is briefing the president on the emergency response teams that he's sent out. The president is receiving information from his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice. You just see a great deal of activity. And you're right,